Welcome to the 2021 Europe Liberty Forum. My name is Matt Warner, president of Atlas Network, and it is my honor and privilege to kick off what promises to be a very rich and rewarding experience for all of us. Some of you may be new to Atlas Network, and so let's take a brief look together at what this network is all about.
Well, Atlas Network is, as the name suggests, a network, and it's global. We work all around the world. We're based in the U.S. We have about 159 partners in the United States right now, and the bulk of our partners are outside, nearly 500 in total. It's a network, that is to say, organizations that share common values of limited government, of free enterprise, personal liberty, of personal responsibility, and work together to advance that agenda by rolling back big government, by reducing barriers to people making their lives better through creating wealth and owning property and engaging in trade.
Historically, wealthy nations around the world have tried to help low-income countries develop. The way we've been doing it traditionally has not really been working. It's pretty controversial both in terms of its efficacy and in terms of whether it's actually doing more harm than good. There's a movement to do development differently, and that means we need to step back as outsiders and rethink the role that we're playing in helping people in low-income countries achieve their dreams.
I think history will at some point make the difference between those who were just happy alleviating poverty, happy with the status quo, and those who said no. Because we respect everyone, we believe everyone has the right to manifest their fullest potential. We are going to work on the tool for them to get there, which is economic freedom. When it comes to that, I think Atlas Network has been the best.
You know, I think everybody wants two things. They want to make a difference, and they want to contribute to something bigger than themselves. And at Atlas Network, I'm able to do that.
It's inspiring to get to transcend partisan politics. Atlas Network is focusing on, I think, the most important and moral cause in the entire world.
You have the opportunity through Atlas Network to support some really inspiring people who are working in very difficult places and achieving results.
The United States does not have a lock on the idea of freedom and liberty. Human flourishing, freedom, liberty are borderless ideas.
I do think that our network adds real value, and the reason is we're focused on outcomes. And if you look at a return on investment as a philanthropist, I think Atlas Network delivers a very strong return on the investment.
What type of legacy do you want to leave behind? This exactly is the work of Atlas Network.
As you can tell, Atlas Network is nothing without its partners, and this year's Europe Liberty Forum is co-hosted by the Institute for Market Economics in Sofia, Bulgaria. I want to offer a special thank you to Svetla Kostadinova and her whole team. Thank you for your leadership, your guidance, and your collaborative spirit in preparation for this event. I also want to thank our many generous sponsors who have made this important event possible. Special recognition goes to the John Templeton Foundation, the Smith Family Foundation, Templeton Religion Trust, the Frida Utley Foundation, the Thomas W. Smith Foundation, and Sarah Scaife Foundation. And so I also want to welcome our many think tank partners, as well as the many esteemed scholars, entrepreneurs, and philanthropists who are joining us. As core to our mission, Atlas Network is committed to convening the best and brightest minds because we believe that these facilitated exchanges and the collaborations that they inspire have the power to launch the next great innovations for our cause on behalf of a freer and more just world. But before this forum officially can begin, we would like to welcome our co-host, represented by Executive Director Svetla Kostadinova.
Hello, everyone. Hello, dear friends, and thank you for having IME as co-host of this excellent and very well organized, as you will see, Europe Regional Liberty Forum 2021. I'm extremely delighted and excited, and IME has been waiting for that for so many years. So I'm sure that you will use this forum, all the participants and attendees, to increase the visibility of the work that you do, to increase your knowledge and increase the network, because the network is what makes us strong. So personal responsibility is a topic that actually will go and will appear in all the sessions that you will hear in the next 2 days. We will have speakers talking about protectionism and industrial nationalism, about media and fake news, about healthcare system failure and pandemic populism. But all these topics have one common feature: the personal responsibility that was taken away from us, and bureaucrats and governments trying to solve problems by imposing more regulations, by telling us what to do, by not allowing us to work or to open our businesses. So the advancement of liberty requires this personal responsibility, and now is under question, especially after the pandemic is over. Politicians use this crisis and they claim that they will make the perfect society, and we need this interference and regulations and new rules. But will the society be freer and close to perfection with more government regulations and intervention? Well, the clear answer is no, and I'm sure that during these 2 days, we will have participants sharing the failures and the solutions that will actually point to the link between the personal responsibility and the freedom that we so much need in order to prosper. So I welcome all, and again, thank Atlas Network for organizing this event and for inviting us to design an excellent program that we'll all enjoy.
Well, thank you so much, Svetla. And now let's jump into the big topics. To get us started, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Jack Shannon, a key member of Atlas Network's Institute Relations team. Jack, over to you.
Thank you, Matt, and hello. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be talking about COVID's continued threat to public health, but also what it means for European economies. Although there have been plenty of concerning examples of Big Brother overreach, at the same time, COVID gave many governments the perfect incentive to liberalize. Can we gain some momentum and use these examples to demonstrate the moral values of a free economy? To talk about how we might move forward, I would like to welcome a few of my friends to the stage. Lachizar Bogdanov from Institute for Market Economics in Bulgaria, Konstantinos Saravakos from KEFIM in Greece, Carlos Stagnaro from Instituto Bruno Leoni in Italy, and Ilana Leonteva from Lithuanian Free Market Institute in Lithuania. Thank you all very much for being here today. I'm excited to have this talk with you and to be sharing the time on stage. As the world begins to navigate the post-pandemic economic recovery, we gathered this group of speakers to discuss the particular challenges facing European economies in 2021. I'd like to start with a broad question to Ilana. How has the perceived role of government changed during the pandemic based on the way that these governments have responded to COVID-19?
We saw a definite rise of the government's role all around the globe, and it was due to improper understanding of the relationship between the lockdown sectors, people who could not use their labor, their work, their property, and the government which acted on behalf of the other people. If those relationships were based on a contract basis, there would be no treatment of the government as our helper. You know, people would not discuss whether government should help businesses. So all the relationship between the government, the people, and the businesses would be much more transparent, and we would avoid this big role of the government.
Yes, very good. Thank you. And Konstantinos, did you have a similar experience in Greece? Could you speak a little bit more to the experience that you had during this pandemic?
Sure, Jack. First of all, I would like to thank you and Atlas Network for inviting me to be here with such a great panel and discussing all these challenging issues that we'll see with the next day in Europe. I'm a bit concerned, I have to say, when in regards with the role of government the next day in Europe. I think that the pandemic was a chance for a lot of, an excuse at the same time for a lot of governments to take their role, an extensive role in our society and economy as well. The pandemic, I think, has restored the faith of people to government's ability to solve problems. But in this moment, I have to say that this is not the role of the government. And in fact, even if we should pay our respects for some choices that saved lives, and we have to do this, that's their experience, this was an emergency and we should not take it in the next day with us. As a lot of theories and the public choice theory shows, politicians do not make choices for the general or the so-called public good, but they're making choices for their own interest in order to get re-elected. And in a democracy, that's maybe fair, but the next day the governing of countries should be treated with less state, restricted state, and get back our lives and not let the government to regulate our economy and society, individual rights. And if we think examples from the Central Europe, like the Hungarian one, which all the forces and the powers of the legislative were concentrated to a certain people, to a certain authority, I'm a bit skeptical, I have to say, and concerned on the next day on government in Europe.
Thank you very much for that insight. That's very helpful. And to our representative from IME, the co-host of this year's Europe Liberty Forum, Lachazar, I'd like to give you an opportunity to speak broadly about your experience in Bulgaria over the past year and a half.
Thank you, Jack. Let me be a bit optimistic here. I think a lot has been said about the lockdowns, the thresholds of government regulation and the use or abuse of emergency powers to basically control the life of everyone and the business of everyone. But the optimistic trait that I saw was that businesses and citizens in general, I think, started to hold government administration a bit more accountable and not accepting the excuses for certain reforms and even very simple things like use of electronic services or other means of doing or applying regulations. So it became obvious that when there is an emergency and there is a political will to do something, you can very, very easily introduce new modern ways of operating and remove all the red tape that was, let's say, well accepted before. So all the excuses that some reforms are extremely difficult, that they would take years and very complicated measures and changes in legislations, all these myths apparently proved to not be true. So that's my optimistic view. So it was a push for change. It was a push for some radical steps. Some of them were bad in terms of increasing government regulations and meddling into people's lives and businesses, but others were good. Actually, they proved that governments can work faster, cheaper, and reduce red tape. And now I think citizens know more and businesses know more, and they will demand more from future governments.
Thank you, sir. In a time where negativity is so prevalent, I appreciate the optimistic tone you struck there. And to Carlo, did you have a similar experience in Italy? What were the changes that you saw that may be permanent? What changes may be occurring soon? Just please generally speak to your experience during the pandemic.
Well, I think that to some extent, yes, initially the pandemic showed how much regulation is costly and how it can create problems to economic activity and ultimately to the quality of life of everybody. Just to make an easy example, when in the very beginning there was a big scarcity in Italy as well as elsewhere of face masks, and it became clear that masks can protect people. In my country, a number of licenses and authorizations were suspended in order for businesses to get into the market as soon as possible and start producing new masks, and that worked pretty well. At the same time, in the following weeks and months, a number of other intrusive regulations were introduced, including some controls on foreign investments and screening of foreign investments and forms of government special powers in order to prevent the takeover of domestic firms, and even a ban on dismissals by Italian companies, which is still in place. In fact, all of these measures were intended initially as provisional limits to keep the social peace or something like that. But in fact, they were renewed and renewed and renewed. And almost 2 years on, we are still dealing with this kind of regulation. So I think that on balance, not just we had to suffer the pandemics, but we also had to deal with a sort of government intervention pandemics, which is still with us. And to me, I don't see any vaccine in sight so far.
Well, I appreciate all of your comments on this topic. Obviously, there's a lot to cover here, and I'd like to get into some more specifics, if you don't mind. So I'd like to start with Lachazar on cross-border trade, not only within Europe and within the European Union, but outside the region. How do you see the path forward for trade developing as we begin to make our way out of the pandemic and attempt to make economic recovery a real possibility here? So Lachazar, if you could go into that topic of trade within the region and outside the region.
First of all, there was a common belief that the world will, or the world economy will deglobalize. So that was the first major assumption. Then this shock would permanently damage global trade and trade between countries. And it proved so completely wrong. So global trade volumes recovered to pre-crisis levels in September 2020. So in 6 months or 7 months after the crisis started, global trade recovered. The same happened to intra-EU trade. And actually, if you look at data within for the trade between EU countries, you'll see that the fall in international trade was actually smaller than the overall decline in economic activity or industrial production. In this sense, I think the history proved that the world and people across the world want to trade, want to use the benefits of specialization, of globalization. The way forward is well paved with some very serious minds. By the way, in March this year, we have a historic record level of global trade. So it's not only past the pre-crisis level of, let's say, 2018 or 19, but it's actually between 5 and 7% higher. So the shock of the pandemic was not a crisis that deglobalized the world. What will deglobalize the world, if at all, would be government policies and interventions that deliberately would want to put barriers to trade.
Very good. Konstantinos, would you mind speaking on this topic, please?
Of course, I would like to add another view on the topic. What I can see is a European Union contradiction. On the one hand, you have a single market the internal market, which is a free trade zone. And actually in KEFIM, along with the European Liberal Forum last November, we did an empirical research in which we showed that European Union convergence is associated with increases in economic freedom. We saw it statistically for the long term, from 90s till now. So we can identify that free trade is the main mechanism of this relationship, the increase in the economic freedom as you access the European Union. But on the other hand, we can identify a difficulty to conclude in concluding new free trade agreements with other regions of the world. So the European Union trade with other regions is not in its best. And I think that we should look upon it because the competences of EU institutions on the one hand and the ratification from member states on the other hand, who is going to decide for these agreements is the main complex network that brings this problem to us. And who loses from all this complex system? Of course, the citizens and the consumers. I think in some cases, we could have a lot of better or same quality products with lower fares from other regions of the world. But protectionism, subsidies to countries that they have to be more competitive in the internal market brings this problem forward to us. And it's besides the problem of the COVID that Lazar very well said that it's not a major problem right now. I think that we should overlook to establish new free trade agreements with other regions of the world and identify this contradiction.
Thank you, sir. Very good. So in addition to trade, the pandemic has affected many sectors that we all are concerned with, whether it be regulation, tax competitiveness, climate change. All of these issues have been touched in some way by the COVID-19 pandemic. Alana or Carlo, I'd like for one of the two of you to speak on a more specific example of how we've seen COVID-19 shift the economies in Europe and how you see those changes occurring going forward.
Yeah, sure. People were frightened by certain fragility of the market, which we have seen under pandemic. But I think this is an excellent example which we can use to educate people. People tend to appreciate something when it is lost. So this fragility of the market, when we saw the supply chains problems and so on, it highlighted what a beautiful creature the market do we have, and how much we appreciate it every day when we have the privilege of having supplies being delivered just exactly at the hour when it has to be put in the production. So everything worked so perfectly on the global arena, and it required no government regulation, non-government support. And even now, when we see these problems with the recovering the logistics and so on, of course, some people use this chance to blame speculators and so on. But again, for the free marketers, this is a perfect chance to preach about the ability of the market to recover. And we see that those fluctuations of prices, of course, to some extent, they just reflect the policies of the central banks, but not only, they all also reflect the ability of the market to recover. So I guess this is an excellent chance to explain to people what a beautiful market do we all have, and how do we have to evaluate the global privileges that we all share.
Very good. And Carlo, please.
Well, yes, you mentioned climate change, and as you know, Europe already before the pandemics had a very ambitious plan to cut emissions in the next few years. In fact, we wanted to cut emissions by 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. Now, after the pandemics and the definition of a big relief package of over 700 billion euro by the European Union. The goal to cut emissions has been much increased to minus 55% by 2030. And what is worse is that, I mean, you can even agree with such an aggressive plan to reduce the environmental impact from human activities, but the point is whether is it possible to achieve this result via market-based or market-friendly measures, such as carbon pricing or technological innovation, or whether this becomes a sort of Troy horse to increase and promote government intervention in the economy. And my feeling is that this latter option is gaining momentum both at the European level and at the level of member states. In fact, the way we are trying to achieve the goal of cutting emissions goes through a number of public spendings and subsidies that may produce large distortions in competition and in how the economy works.
Yes.
Jack, can I add something into this question? Because I think that I can say something that it's not too obvious for everyone. I think Carlo will share the same experience, but Lazar and Elena live in countries that they are fiscal balanced. So the pandemic has an enormous impact in the fiscal balance of the countries. In Greece, the pandemic hit badly and damaged the tourism, and which is the main branch of production in Greece and for the whole economy, the main point of reference. Therefore, there is a severe impact on fiscal stability. On the one hand, the government supported a lot and generously, I can say, both the employees and businesses during this pandemic, in particular when it comes to tourism industry. On the other hand, because of the lockdowns, the tax revenues were very low. So we have this balanced budget deficit, which we had to cover. And I think I have not to say that we all know this story, which begins with Greece borrowing money to cover the debt, and how it ends. I have not to say something further to this. So I'm very concerned on the fiscal impact of the pandemic to my country, and France, Italy, Cyprus, all over the European region. You can see countries that they have a colossal debt that they cannot repay, and the pandemic makes it much more difficult.
And of course, we see the enormous rise of prices on the property market, on the stock exchange, with the commodities, which will eventually also shift to the consumer prices. So the central banks, which set the target now to reach the famous 2% inflation, of course, I guess they will overdo. And we will pay the price not through the taxation, but through the inflation.
Yeah,
of course. Yes, Carlo.
Sorry, go ahead, Costa.
No, the monetary aspect is neglected, I think, in this impact. And a lot of people may understand that monetary policy is not something that we understand and we can discuss. And since we have money and funds and we can cover the balance and make social policy, that's good. But where it comes from, this money?
Yeah, I sorry, Lena, go ahead.
Please, Carlo.
I fully agree on monetary policy, but I wanted to highlight a sort of paradox in many European countries. This is certainly the case of Italy. I assume it's also pretty much the same in Greece and perhaps in Spain, Cyprus, and so on and so forth. That is, on one hand, we have introduced and we are still keeping very generous mechanisms to support workers, which is fine, and businesses, which is less fine, in order to prevent any disruption. And at the same time, we are continuously speaking about transitions and transformations that should be even supported by public money. The Next Generation EU program is specifically focused on the so-called ecological transition and the digital transition. Now, you cannot have at the same time a major government-led or government-induced transformation of the economy and keeping the same businesses and the same workers doing the same stuff over and over again. We have at least to choose among these two things. If you try to get both, you are going to procure twice as much harm to the economy than otherwise.
Pandemic definitely is a time of change, and we now live in the huge change of the 21st century. And so the regulatory system should be adjusted to allow the change happen quickly and smoothly. And if there are certain compensation due to the temporary restriction of the property right to the people, they must be quick and allowing people to find new solutions. They should not freeze people in asking for alms from the government. So we see this possibility to make change as a main vehicle of the crisis to a new economy, not through the EU budget allocation.
Very true. So I've heard you all touch on a lot of challenges that we're facing as an economy moving forward. I'd like to get a little more specific with those. So Lachazar, I apologize, we're going to strike a pessimistic tone here. And it would likely take us a few hours to cover all of the challenges that we're currently facing. But if you all could speak to those particular challenges and how our partners, how you all and your organizations plan to overcome those, maybe some strategies for how we're going to move past some of these more permanent issues, whether they be regulatory, tax problems, you mentioned climate change, competition with other regions for tourism, et cetera. The list goes on. So if you wouldn't mind, Konstantino, speaking to that first, some particular challenges that are facing your country, but facing Europe as a whole here.
Well, as I said, the fiscal policy is the most major challenge that we need to face in this time of the pandemic, the economic one. If you see the balance of this year, we're going to have approximately of 10 to 15% budget deficit, which we have to cover, and we have the biggest debt ratio to the GDP in the European Union. So we need to face it. And what KFIM did 2 years ago, and also sets the agenda right now, is that we should move to a flat tax. And we have also estimated the fiscal impact of a flat tax reform in Greece. We need to lower the tariffs and the taxes and keep connected the growth to this model, that it's not the case right now. The governments are very cautious, even if in the last elections 2 years ago, both parties, the center-right party, New Democracy, but also the radical left, we're talking about lower tariffs, and this is a win, if I can say, that both parties from both ideologies come to a conclusion that we need lower tariffs. We have set the agenda for this. But I need to say that I'm a bit also concerned about the freedoms overall in European Union and in Greece as well. I think that we should be, our institutions that we are here and all over Europe, we should be the watchdogs of the recovery and the transition to the normality. We should make sure that we will take our lives back when this ends. And I think that, as Thomas Jefferson puts it, the eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, right? So we need to be there and ensure that when this ends, we will have back our freedoms. And in many cases, in Central Europe and in the Europe's periphery, we see countries turning to authoritarian regimes.
Lachazar, if you could share, please, the specific challenges that you see facing Bulgaria and the EU more generally.
Well, starting from the EU, I think the EU is dangerously embracing the idea of industrial policy through government intervention and state aid. And the pandemic gave a big push for this idea. Well, behind the disguise of diversification, reducing dependencies and stuff like that. So just last month, there's a new document on this. And basically, although it being quite vague, it basically draws a map of future huge subsidies and interventions that would supposedly foster industrial investment and new strategic companies that the EU needs to have. At the same time, the problem that we are facing in Bulgaria and probably in other small countries is that in a framework like this, it is very difficult to compete on a, let's say, I know that most of you hate this, level playing field, but if half of the countries in the EU can offer generous state aid subsidies to businesses, especially to fancy global corporations, it's very difficult to have similar investments and businesses and research in your country. And the danger is that our government and the political discussion would be to say, okay, let's have it here as well. So it's kind of a race to the bottom in terms of everyone trying to outbid the others in offering state aid and regulating and having these advanced purchase agreements, all sorts of subsidies and state aids that distort freedom and competition. So that's the danger for us. And we've seen this with auto plants, for example. Look at the map of automobile production in Europe. In the last 10 years, all the new plants started with some sort of generous state aid. So countries are competing to offer grants and subsidies and tax exemptions and all sorts of, let's say, unfair practices using taxpayers' money most of the time. And protecting the particular investor. So this very strange distortion of the competition is, I think, a danger. And pandemic gave a perfect excuse for such type of strategic thinking and policies.
Very good. Alana?
Yeah, we see the same dangers in Lithuania. A lot of EU money come to support certain industries and especially the government agencies. And the main priority of my institute is a tax reform and deregulation. And fortunately enough, our priorities became also the prime agenda of the new government. And what we see now, the allocation of funds from the EU prevents the government from really having to deregulate, really having to optimize the state functions as all businesses did. Under the pressure of pandemic, everyone optimized their functions. And about the taxation policy, we were very close to considering corporate profit tax reform and moving to taxation only of the allocated profits, namely dividends. But with a new move to have this minimum global corporate tax, there is a threat that our government will not take this policy action. And I see this hampering tax competition as a major threat to global trade, because there is no global trade without global movement of capital, without free movement of capital. And of course, with a minimum profit tax, a big part of the economic rationale to allocate capital in different countries will be lost. But even more so, we worry not only about the utilitarian part of the story, but it is important to keep the democracies. The international tax competition is probably the main vehicle which keeps state budgets from growing ever more and more. And we learned through the pandemic that there will always be a need for more budget funds. So the international tax competition is a main, our last resort in keeping our national governments and procuring our democracies, because otherwise, if there are no limits to how much taxes you can raise, eventually the democracies will eat themselves. That is the main danger.
And to you, Carlo, please, the challenges that you see us facing here moving forward.
Well, I think we as free market think tanks and organizations should do what the anti-globalization movement made a few years ago. It has to show that another world is possible. And what do I mean by this? We face a number of big challenges that are clearly in front of us, such as climate change, getting out of the pandemic crisis, and so on and so forth. And the reaction from many people within the European institutions and several national governments is that the only way to deal with all of this is by going back to old-style industrial policy and by using public spending in order to find a solution. And the implicit assumption behind this is that you already know the solution in advance, and so you just have to put money on it. And I think that our task, which is not an easy one, but it is a necessary one, is to show that doing this way, at the very least, you are going to overpay for the result you get. And it is very likely indeed that you are also going to create distortions and problems in the competition and to actually reduce innovation in the technologies that the politicians do not like for some reason. So our main challenge is to show, I think, that there are very effective market-based policies to deal with these problems, that being libertarians or liberals, or pick the word you like, does not mean that you just ignore this kind of big problems. It only means that you believe that human ingenuity is the main resource to deal with them. And so you have to rely not on industrial policies, not on picking winners, not on public spending, but, for example, on carbon pricing, on opening up markets to competition, and so on and so forth. So you have to use the diffused knowledge, as Hayek would say, and not the centralized brain and interests in national governments and the EU institutions.
Very well said, Carlo. Thank you. The last thing I'd like to get to, unless you have a comment there, Konstantinos, to add on to Carlo's thoughts.
I would like to add something to what Elena said.
Please.
About the global policy on the tax competition. Elena was absolutely right. And I have to say that what we know from economics is that corporate taxes are associated most with growth. And countries like Bulgaria that we have here, or Lithuania, or Latvia, as we know from the Tax Foundation study that publishes every year, the Tax Competitiveness Index, we've seen that they have invested in their policy of lower taxes, and they have bared already the cost of its policy, and they are waiting to give fruits right now. So if we introduce a tax that it's global and we destroy competition, tax competition, why is this fair for these countries that they have already bared the cost and they're waiting for the benefits of this? Right now, we introduce a tax that will hamper these countries that they are not, and also Greece, but they are not the strongest ones. We do not harm the strongest ones as this decision would like to say. It would not make it more fair for all of us. but we're hampering the countries that they are struggling to bring more growth.
Exactly, and profit we see as a main source of investment, especially in countries where the access to the borrowed capital is quite narrow. So the companies which can invest their profits with no tax burden, they increase productivity. And of course, we have a big spread of productivity with the Western world yet. So we have to follow up, and we have to be very quick to be competitive and to create economies which are sustainable. So this is really a crucial point where we need tax competition and where we have to keep our tax system competitive and innovative.
Very good. We've covered a lot here today. We have a few minutes left. So while we're here, we have many people listening in today, many smart folks who are going to solve problems going forward. What questions remain unanswered for you all? What are some of the things that in the back of your mind you're unsure of? We haven't decided yet how we want to move forward. So what are these problem questions that we don't yet have an answer to, but maybe someone listening or one of us here will be able to solve those problems moving forward? I'd like to go to Alana, if possible, and to the rest of you, maybe ending on Lachazar's optimistic note.
Yeah, of course, there is a big trouble of trade with the regimes which are not free and far from being free. And we always have this dilemma in our countries, and I know it's a global dilemma. How should we deal with those countries in trade and also in allowing their investment? So I would be really happy to hear my colleagues' remarks on that.
Yes, that's a big point to which I would add another one. I think that during the pandemics, we have seen that many people, and perhaps even most people, actually seek protection. They seek protection of their jobs, they seek protection from external threats, and they seek protection from competition. And I think that one of the main challenges we as liberty advocates face is to find a persuasive way to explain that protection does not protect you, in fact, that liberty delivers the best way to ensure that society and individuals will prosper.
If I can say, I share the concerns with Elena. As what we have to do when in trade with regimes that they are authoritarian, and we have a lot of the last years that they have turned to populist and authoritarian regimes in Europeans' periphery, but also in European Union as well. And I know that in theory, Milton Friedman claims that economic freedom inevitably leads to political freedom. And we have witnessed some cases 30 years ago that this happened even in the long term. But right now, can we trade? Is it moral? It's a moral thing. Is it moral to trade with countries that they do not have to bear the cost of liberal democracy and meet the rule of law provisions? Who benefits from this situation? Is it the people, the individuals, or is it the corporations and the politicians that they have made a chronic capitalist model in these countries? And with what Carlos said, I totally agree also, and that was my first point when we began, that I think that the pandemic has restored the faith to government's ability to solve problems. That's why also Carlos said. So that's the concern I share with you in the beginning. I'm not sure that we will have a decade in front of us that we will see liberalization. I hope to be wrong.
And to Lachazar, please, 2 minutes on the path forward for Europe.
Well, I think that the long-term problems that Europe is facing are, let's say, a mixture of demographics, education, science, and entrepreneurship. And the outcome of this is a low investment level. So the positive note, the optimistic note is that the pandemic was a huge shock that might shake things a little bit here. So it's a way to spur and to foster innovation and to challenge long-term trends and to try to experiment with new institutional solutions, new regulatory solutions and frameworks. So that's my optimistic view. So in a way, the pandemic gives us an opportunity, a window of opportunity for us, let's say classical liberals or libertarians, as you wish, to promote the ideas of freedom, of competition, of entrepreneurship, of innovation, and to change the way things are. I mean, that's the opportunity here, at least within Europe. So about global challenges, I'm not sure that we can do that. So.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate all of your time today. It's been an honor to speak with you. We're proud to have you be a part of Atlas Network and to be fighting the good fight in Europe. Thank you again, and I'd just like to bid you adieu today. Best of luck to all of you, and I'll be in touch soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Well, I'd like to thank Lachizar, Konstantinos, Alana, and Carlo for their session today, and I'd like to thank all of you for watching and attending this session. If you made it here, you're probably navigating the platform just fine, but I did want to call your attention to a couple features that you may have missed. If you haven't seen it already, please check out the welcome instructional video in the event lobby. It will tell you everything you need to know about the event platform. You can find the link to this video in the center of our event lobby page. Also, it was great to hear from Svetla, and we're very thankful to her and her team for their help in making this successful event. I'd also like to encourage you to click in the top left corner to learn more about our co-host, Institute for Market Economics in Bulgaria. All of our sessions will be available on demand, so if you need to step away, don't sweat. Just go to the event program and watch the recorded session after it's concluded. Finally, if you need any help at all throughout the forum, please click the help button in the bottom left corner of your screen. A member of our team would be happy to assist you. We now have a short break. We'll be back at 1400 Eastern European time for our next session, Women's Business in Europe. See you soon.